Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
A look back at the biggest stories of 2017 tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Karanja Janaku, executive editor, Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
Bill Dries, a senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. And Toby Sells, news director with the Memphis Flyer.
Hi, Eric.
And so we talk about some of the biggest stories of the year, and I started making notes on this a couple of weeks ago. I'm not sure what I would have put first, but given that the statues were brought down, a week ago now, that clearly was the biggest story. It was a big story all year long. I'll start with you, Karanja. I mean, your thoughts of that night, the coverage of the Tri-State Defender, your thoughts on the whole situation.
Well, like the rest of us, we knew something was bubbling, but whether we knew it was going to happen that night, no. That was our production night also. The night you're putting your paper together to go to press. We go to press at 10 o'clock, and so this was pretty much happening at that time. And it became apparent, I don't know, maybe around 6 or so, that, whoa, this is happening, and this is happening right now. So we just swung into get people there mode, what adjustments what we're going to make, to get the best coverage possible. Yeah,
I was really struck. I was coming back from out of town, and my phone blows up, and I kind of get off the highway and look at it, and people are talking about these statues coming down. Drove by the Jefferson Davis statue, and there was some police, and thought, well, I'll go up to the health sciences area. You couldn't get close. Right. I'm not sure, I mean, the TV coverage I ended up watching, the scale of the police presence, the dump trucks that were everywhere, it was amazing. Bill, you were down there. I mean, you
yeah, and I got there pretty early in it before it was completely sealed off. We had been told by the administration that there was a plan in place to do this by whatever means it happened by. There was the plan to actually do it, to actually take the monuments down. And then there was the process or the legal reasoning and then the council action that would dictate that plan swinging into action. So the plan to take the monuments down, we had all been told that it was in place and was ready to go. And some of it was probably based on lessons learned from New Orleans and some other cities where the monuments had come down as well.
And we're going to have Bruce McMullen, the chief legal officer for the mayor's administration, on next week to talk about some of that. Because I think, Toby, the people who've come to me, this is just my social media, my friends, my acquaintances, I've had no one really come to me and say, oh, those statues should have stayed up. I have had people come and say, I don't like how that happened. Absolutely. I've had people say that because, again, disclosure, I'm board chair of the Overland Park Conservancy, so I've had people come to me and say, don't you worry, as a person who's in charge of parkland, or the conservancy that's in charge of parkland, that this kind of maneuvering, kind of dark of night, behind closed doors, could be done. Maybe this was the ends, justified the means, but what if you don't agree with the ends?
Precisely, and that method, what happened that night of the council vote is, it had gone through, there was an ordinance in place that had gone through a couple of readings. They delayed it, then they came back for the third reading, and then they had this replacement ordinance, I guess that's the terminology, Bill. Substitute ordinance that came and, and redid the entire rule. The council never read it. The public was never given a version of this. The council voted on it. It was the rule of law before anybody knew what was happening. And then they immediately went into action. And sure, I would say the majority of Memphians are glad those statues came down. But I think that it set this really bad precedent for transparency in local government. Because they have this play in their playbook now, and they can use it for anything if they wanted to. They can call it the statue play. If there's something that's unpopular in the budget, or if they wanted to sell the Greens Ward, say, or something, some other thing that they wanted to do, where they didn't want a whole lot of public scrutiny, a lot of public involvement in, they could use this kind of end-run play to make that thing happen. And And I think a lot of folks that watch City Hall are kind of watching that and are worried about the way that they might use that in the future. I doubt that it'll ever become, just a standard play that they use for everything, but there it is. And, and Kemp Conrad has come on this show, Councilmember Kemp Conrad has come on this show and kind of poked fun at the public's mistrust of the council, talk about black helicopters, some other things. And if you ever wonder where that comes from, it's stuff like this.
And some of that was in the context of a proposal put forward to change the rules about how people could protest, how people could gather, 5Ks and so on. There's a couple of weeks ago, a month ago, that we had council on. Your thoughts, Karanja, on the means by which, I think the Tri-State Defender had argued they should come down. I think the Memphis Daily News had, the Flyer had. I don't know if there were any paper in town that hadn't, from an editorial point of view, argued that the statute should come down. But the means, which had been talked about for months, sometimes publicly, it was a very carefully laid out plan of passing some ordinances, putting pieces together, creating this nonprofit. Do the means concern you? Because as Toby articulated, they could be used for other ends that maybe Tri-State or you don't agree with.
Well, I live in the United States, so obviously I'm concerned about the rule of law, but I don't have this concern that I'm hearing from Toby. I don't think that I could underemphasize the ends. The ends were just paramount. They had to come down. And I have faith to a reasonable degree with the administration that they did it legally. It would be ludicrous not to have found a legal way to move forward. So, and there was just so much writing on this. There was just simply no way that we could get to the MLK 50 situation and have those statues up. They had to come down. And so that's where I come down on that.
Yeah, and I agree. You said you agree with that. The ends.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, just so everyone's clear.
Certainly. Yeah, we've come out certainly and said those statues needed to come down, and certainly
right. But when I hear him, there seems like there's a heaviness that this is going to be used in some way to do X, Y, and Z. I don't hear that clear cutness about it. I think Bill was talking about that.
Yeah, I think that you will see some caution in using this. This is a pretty unique legal situation. It's a very complex legal situation. Alan Wade, who is the city council's attorney, who was the city government's lead attorney in this particular court case, has described all of the complexities surrounding a legal process for removing these statues on the state end as quote unquote Confederate hell. Yeah. There were all kinds of different processes that had to take place. The State Historical Commission could hear the matter on one date but could not act for another month. If it acted, then the statues could not actually be moved for another 120 days. So I think that what happened was the attorneys at City Hall found a way that was complex, a way that moved very quickly, but a way that actually was not even a measure for the different loopholes, complexities, and leaps and jumps that you had to make in state law around this issue.
And to the point of the state, when we'd had the mayor on, we'd had city council people through the fall. I always ask, because I'd heard this from so many other people, are you going to get this done before the legislature goes in session in January? Because the legislature is going to close every possible loophole. There was a real sense of urgency that this property shift was kind of out there. People had kind of talked about it. People were talking about it behind the scenes. But all that path was going to get shut down. It also seems, and I've had just pure people speculating, but who are in the know, that this path that they use now could get altered or shut down. The state is so mad. Certain legislators are so mad. I think Haslam was in favor of them coming down. But a lot of, particularly the rural legislators, saw no need for these statues to come down.
On any given Tuesday, you have to remember that the average council agenda is 20 to 30 items. And the council members know how the process works out of necessity. After about 3 meetings in the slot there, sitting at the chair taking the votes, you become quickly acclimated to how it works. Does it move too fast at times? Yes, it does. Right. There are times when things come up and the public is lagging behind and the council's trying to get through this agenda with items the vast majority of which they all agree should be passed. But sometimes that does get trampled, and being on the council is a constant state of being reminded that you have to make sure the people understand what you're doing.
Well, a couple more thoughts on this. One, it is a grave site still, at least at the forest, underneath the forest statue. Do we know what's going to happen next? I mean, is the council, with the holidays, I'm kind of out of it, so I don't know.
That will go through Chancery Court.
That'll go through Chancery Court. What happens next with the gravesite? Do we know where the statues are? And there's a kind of real fixation on that, almost as a parlor game, but also it's a very serious issue. There's a lot of symbolism, good and bad for people, about where the statues are, and we don't know.
No idea.
Yeah. I think Mr. Turner said that wherever they are, they're safe.
And they're together.
And that's Van Turner, who's the head of the Green Space Inc. nonprofit that took possession of the two parks. And do we know, that's the other thing, Van Turner, who's also county commissioner, came out and said, this is, I think, I'm going to paraphrase, this is just the beginning. And there are other things we're going to do. Do we know yet what those other things might be in terms of what Van Turner and Green Space Inc. might do?
No, but this is, it's certainly interesting that you have this kind of nonprofit formed, because both of these parks are key pieces of real estate. Health Sciences Park is in the middle of a medical district that is now attempting to have a master plan to connect all of the institutions within it, and Health Sciences Park is really in the center of all of this new development that's going on around it, some of it residential. And Memphis Park, where the Jefferson Davis statue had been, is really has been the nerve center for the Fourth Bluff efforts and most of the activities that have happened on that stretch of the riverfront. So these two parks, even without the monuments, are at the center of a lot of plans for those two respective areas.
And kind of this vision of a newer Memphis, a Memphis that's moving forward. I will say, this is a tough story to cover. It's an interesting thing to cover. The Flyer is a left of center paper. I mean, it always has been, so you all have that. Tri-State also. For us, we've always been this nonpartisan, the Memphis Daily News, and this is me speaking as publisher, not on behalf of WKNO. It's a tough story to cover because I personally, and we as an editorial board, wanted those statues down, but you also, you're sort of trying to find the other people who are either critical of the legal process or have some belief in those statues. And we'll have in the future people on the show, we'll try to, who are of another opinion of what should have happened with those statues. So I want to make sure I say that. We'll move on to some of the other stories, and there's a lot of themes in this about, we have a new mayor, Mayor Strickland, the council, all kinds of things that happened in this last year. But one thing this did speak to too, and we talked a little before the show, Karanja, was a year, looking back on other issues, a year of activism, almost going back to when the bridge was shut down, Black Lives Matter. Talk about your thoughts on activism across the board in Memphis and in this past year.
Well, that's the big thing that I'll be looking at. I mean, this coming year. For me, the question is the African American community going to find a way to empower itself at a level that we've not seen in recent years? Okay, there's always talk about that. Is there a way that we can marshal our forces from an economic standpoint? Is there something that we can do to police our community? So the question is whether the activism that has popped up around the bridge, around Take 'em Down 901, whether that can any kind of way stimulate, push forward, pull, so that there is a new level of activism generally in the African American community. We were also talking earlier about somewhat of a division, and we talked about division relative to the activists and the administration, but there's also a division somewhat within the African American community relative to activism. Beyond popular belief, not everybody thought in the African American community that the statue should come down or how they should come down. So there's always that type of division. And so the question is, how are those elements, are those elements going to be able to talk in a more consistent way that's going to get us to the end of 2018 in a substantively different posture than we are coming to the end of 2017.
And it's interesting you say that because next year's a big election year, Bill. We did a show a week or two ago with the head of the local Republican Party and Democratic Party, and you got a really interesting insight into the way they're approaching things against the backdrop that of statues of protests of the African American community and where they are, but also against the backdrop of Trump and the impact that President Trump's policies have had at a local level, the Alabama race. And it was interesting. It was, for me, the headline coming out of that show we did was the head of the local Republican Party, Lee Mills, saying we have to divorce ourselves from Trump because President Trump may be very popular in rural Tennessee, but he's less and less popular among the educated suburban, kind of typically white Republican base of Republicans in this area.
Right, and if you're talking about winning elections, which is what this is about, winning countywide elections, this is a county that Hillary Clinton carried in the last presidential general election with 60% of the vote. I think that we have this tremendous ongoing discussion about tactics in Shelby County and in Memphis in particular that was underway before Trump surprise win to take the White House. The bridge protest, which was just a seminal moment in all of this, was in July of 2016. Way before November in terms of how quickly things move. And I think some of the difference over tactics here is generational. You have younger people who are becoming involved in protest, who are what's happening to them is pretty quickly they're starting to ask the question, is protest all that this is about? What is the next level of political involvement? Should I be involved with a political party whose goal is to elect people with a D or an R behind their name, or should I stay with issues? If I stick with issues, am I ever going to find any candidate that I can get behind and work for who's going to be true to those particular causes? But at the same time, these younger people believe that protest on a constant level is necessary to keep people engaged. That's very different from another generation who believes that protest is part of a larger overall strategy and is used more sparingly toward a specific goal and after negotiations and before the next round of negotiations.
Yeah. Toby, thoughts on the election coming up in this next year, or other stories from this past year that were big on your list of things that were covered? There was so much that happened that we haven't even gotten to.
Really were, yeah. And I would say the huge changes at the commercial appeal can't be left out of the big stories there. When Gannett Company, when they closed the deal to buy the commercial appeal and some other newspapers in April 2016, they said we're going to take about 12 months, not make any major changes. Almost a year to the date, in April 2017, we had an enormous amount of layoffs at the paper. Around 20 staffers were let go. The leadership there came out. Louis Graham came out in letters, said, this is part of a historic transformation of the newspaper in a way that Gannett and the USA Today Network, they want to kind of make a one-team approach for Tennessee news. And we've seen some of that shortly after that. Louis Graham, who'd been at the paper for many, many years, left to go to Alsac St. Jude, where he is now. And there was a new executive editor over there, Mark. I am on his last name. He's the new executive editor over there. And we've seen a lot of changes. We've seen a lot of Nashville news and a lot of Knoxville news showing up in the daily pages of the commercial appeal, and that'll continue, I think, as they continue to push their digital product.
And Ryan Poe, who's often on the show, just couldn't be here today, and Chris Harrington also, who's been on the show from time to time, we just couldn't schedule it. It is an interesting thing. All of you guys worked at the CA at one point, right? Yeah, that's so interesting. And you think back to one of the folks in our newsroom who was at the CA who started there 10 plus years ago. They had a newsroom of 200 plus, 210, 220. They are, by I think most counts, local. They're down to 28.
Right.
And this is not, I want to say, me picking on the CA.
Sure.
Because, and your boss, Ken Neal, the publisher of the Contemporary Media, he and I talk about it often, that it's just bad for cities, and this is happening nationally. I'm not angry at Gannett that they're doing this. I'm not trying to blame them. It's a business model, and the business has changed underneath them. And people will come up to me and say, "Oh, this is a great opportunity for you." I'm like, well, for the Daily News? Not really, because we're not going to staff up to 200 people. There are stories that just you're not going to get from a daily metro paper, not just in Memphis. This is going on in Nashville. It's going on around the country. So it's an interesting time. It's a difficult time. And I feel terrible for the really good people who are over there who've been through so much change and kind of trauma. Some of the other bigger stories, Bill, maybe I'll turn to you in terms of everything going on at Overton Park, not just with, again, disclosure, I'm chairman of the board of the Overton Park Conservancy, but just the Brooks, the MCA closing, a whole lot of news, a whole lot of things happening, good and bad, in that area. Yeah,
when the year began, we were talking about what does a parking compromise look like for the Memphis Zoo and the Greens Ward, and is that plan going to hold together, or is it going to change again? Ultimately, it did. At the end of the year, we're talking about what I think we can all agree is a much larger fundamental change in a park that has always had these institutions of the zoo, the Brooks Museum of Art, the Old Forest, the most recent addition to it, the Levitt Shell, all of these institutions included in it. Well, the Brooks is going to move to a Riverside new museum in about 5 or 6 years. The Memphis College of Art is going to close its doors after about 60 years in the park, after more than 80 years overall, including their time in Victorian Village. Memphis College of Art will close in 2 years. Those are two huge institutions, not only for the park, but for the city of Memphis. So at year's end, that process is still working its way through, and we have the first concrete, very well thought out plan for what to do with the Brooks, and it is from Ekundayo Bandele, the founder of Hattie Lou Theater, who has proposed a National Black Theater Museum and he already has partnerships lined up with 4 national black theater organizations to not just contribute to it, but to move to Memphis from the cities they are currently in and be a part of that.
It would be, I mean, Hattie Lou Theater is one of the third, by jokes, Ekundayo jokes, there's different ways to count it, but they're about the 3rd largest African-American theater in the country. Houston, then Chicago, then Memphis. And I remember talking to him about that, and I said, well, not Atlanta, not Charlotte. He said, no. I mean, we're the 3rd largest. And his connections throughout the African-American theater world are really impressive, and it would be transformative. I mean, I don't know your thoughts on it, Karaja. I mean, it would be a transformative theater, transformative tourist attraction, a transformative entry into Overton Park.
All of those things, but in the larger sense, it's about art and the importance that the connection between art and critical thinking. And when I look at Memphis, that's where we got to go. We have to step up relative to how we think, how we go about teaching our children to think, and I think that art plays a really big role into that. And it sort of even ties back into what we were talking about earlier about activism. And I think that we have a tendency, when we're thinking about activism, when we critically think and we don't think our way through it, we say activism and we immediately think protest. We immediately think demonstration. Well, activism is more than that. I mean, the activists themselves, many of them are making the point that we're not just about protest. We're not just about demonstration. We're about pre-K. We're about literacy and helping people learn how to read, those types of things. So I think that the arts is just it's an element to help us raise our level of thinking and activity.
Just a couple minutes left. Another big piece of sort of quasi-public land was the fairgrounds. Toby, and you and I actually just coincidentally toured the Coliseum right before the mayor's plan. Paul Young with the mayor's office announced the plan that included mothballing the Coliseum, to the frustration of the Coliseum Coalition, a lot of advocates for that building, but a very grand, big plan for the fairgrounds that is tied to a TDZ, tourism development zone. The downtown redevelopment on the riverfront on Mud Island and the Brooks moving down is a separate, but another TDZ. Interesting thoughts on the fairgrounds. I mean, there's at least a plan now, and it's been kind of in limbo for a decade. I mean, since Liberty Land closed.
Right, and and this plan also focuses on youth sports, which is kind of a 2.0 version of an original plan plan that we had a few years ago for the same thing. And people can argue that, you know, that plan is, or the youth sports is kind of an outmoded idea, and there have been groups working to kind of get community support behind different plans, get different thoughts in about what a fairgrounds could be for the people of Memphis and for that area. And you know, the administration went a different way. They said, yeah, we're going to go back to this this youth sports idea. It's a $160 million plan to be paid with through that TDZ, which a lot of the money that would go to the state from a certain area will now stay in to help pay for that. It includes retail. It includes an $80 million youth sports complex there that would be used for travel teams and some of the things. I think there's a hotel and some other things.
Into the community, into Orange Mound,
right.
redevelopment of Melrose High.
Right, that would be turned into
the
like
Green Line and
that's right.
all that.
And they did build access points out into the community like that. Like Bill has said many times, you know, a lot of money is going to be spent to kind of increase access into the park, into the fairgrounds, which I think is a great thing. So the next step in the process, I think, is that the State Building Commission has to approve the TDZ, and it needs to go back for final council approval.
And obviously, there's a lot of concern among some people that the state will take retribution now, given coming full circle back to the issue with the statues, and that some legislators will want to punish, you know, Memphis, not just over the TDZs, but other legislators. So that remains to be seen. Without enough time left, because we talked about a whole lot, Karanja, when Brunell Smith, publisher of the Tri-State Defender and a frequent guest on the show, passed away, it was sudden, it was tragic. It was a gut punch, as you said. Thoughts on Brunell's with 30 seconds left here?
Well, I just think that his family's done really well coming through the process. The Tri-State Defender family is moving forward. We have a president of our board, and they're doing a good job of helping us through the transition. We were already making some transition moves in terms of how we were going to go into the new year, and we've accelerated those plans from there. We appreciate his leadership.
Yeah, well, thank you. And thank you all, appreciate it, and thank you for watching. Join us again next week. We'll have Bruce McMullen from the city on. Thanks, good night.